Yeah.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today on All Bodies Outside. This is Brian Peterson, and I'm super excited for my guest on the show today, who is Akiebia Hicks. And Akiebia has done a lot of great work. She's got a lot of excellent experience working in the National Park Service and has also done some great research that has just opened up the possibilities for Black employment and Black philanthropy in the National Park Service. One of her main research focus is looking at Black employees in the National Park Service and how to support their trajectory through the National Park Service and to open up those opportunities. And she's done a lot of great research there and also helping out with more Black philanthropy in the National Park Service. Another thing that Akiebia does too is she serves on the board of the George Wright Society, and I'm also a board member on the George Wright Society. And since we're both on the board of the George Wright Society, today's episode is sponsored by the George Wright Society. And the George Wright Society, let me give a little bit of a description about them. Their nonprofit champions parks, protected and conserved areas, and other kinds of place-based conservation. And we refer to the George Wright Society as GWS. The GWS honors George Melendez Wright, a Hispanic conservation pioneer and the first scientist to work for the National Park Service. So at your convenience, be sure to check out the George Wright Society website, and I will kind of describe that. That's georgewrightsociety.org, and George is spelled George. Wright is WRIGHT, and it's society.org. So georgewrightsociety.org. Well, hey, Akiebia, thanks for joining us today. I'm really happy that you're here.
Yeah, I'm really happy to be here.
So you have been doing a lot of great research, but first I wanted to start with kind of your experiences working in the National Park Service. I think, did you intern with the National Park Service and also work as an employee with the National Park Service?
Yeah, so my story is a little weird. So my first time ever visiting a national park was my first day at work.
Oh, wow.
So I was actually an undergrad, and I found out about 6 months before graduation that I needed an internship to graduate. Never visited a national park before. I remember posting something on Facebook like, kind of looking for a local internship, and one of my high school teachers, English teachers, actually reached out and was like, "Hey, we're hiring at the Jimmy Carter National Historic Site," and Jimmy Carter is actually her uncle. But she hooked me up with that internship there, started interning at the Jimmy Carter National Historic Site, and realized that I really liked it. And what's so wild about it all is when we talk about lack of diversity in national parks and talk about lack of diversity in visitors and staff, we typically like to bring up lack of access, like, maybe BIPOC people aren't visiting because of XYZ. Maybe it's transportation, or maybe it's the fees for parks. But in my situation, I live 10 minutes away from 2 national parks. Oh, wow. Never visited. So access was not an issue. And both of the national parks that I lived 10 minutes away from were also fee-free parks. So that's also not an issue. So it makes it a little bit more complex than what we like to say, maybe it's the lack of access. So what is really the problem? And I think we get into the lack of awareness to an extent, but like I said, it's very, very complex. So I started out at the Jimmy Carter National Historic Site. I was about to graduate, and I just figured that I would go on to teach, and that was that teaching and maybe coaching track or something like that. Like that is what I wanted to do. Just kept realizing that, hey, like this is like actually awesome. And I got offered my first position with Little River Canyon National Preserve in Fort Payne, Alabama. Really, really, really amazing experience. Really cool being able to kayak and hike for a living pretty much. And it was that park where I kind of picked up my research interest. So I'm working at this park. It's an amazing experience. I'm meeting so many awesome people. Supervisors were amazing. Coworkers were amazing. So I'm living in park housing, and it's maybe a little bit away from the park. I would say not even half a mile away from the actual national park. And I was driving to work one day. So I'm in full uniform, hat, badge, like name tag, everything, full uniform, driving, and I see this car or this truck come the opposite way. And they're starting to slow down a little bit. So I'm like, okay, like what's going on? And in my head, I'm like, okay, I'm kind of new here. Those are probably my neighbors wanting to meet me. So I roll down my window and I see the car completely come to a stop. So I come to a stop, and they ended up just hitting the reverse a little bit and blocked me into the street. So
Whoa.
I'm like, at that point, I'm still kind of like, okay, yeah, like this is a little weird, but it's just my neighbors like wanting to meet me, whatever. The guy gets out of the car, completely turns off his car, gets out of the car, walks over to me, and I'm like, hey, I'm AK, like I'm the new park ranger here. I just moved here. And the first thing he said to me was, what are you doing here? And I'm like, at this point, I'm laughing because I'm like, this is not real. Like, this is a joke. And in my head, it's still a joke. It's so surreal. And he just goes on. And at that point, I actually pulled out my cell phone and I started recording. And he told me that they don't have black park rangers. Like, he asked me where exactly I lived, blase. And I was like telling him that I'm not going to tell you where I live for my safety. He was telling me how he didn't care about my safety. Like, I didn't belong there, all this stuff. And in that moment, I was so grateful that I pulled out my phone to record, because I feel like sometimes we're typically told that we're exaggerating, or, these things don't really happen. And like, to know that I have that recording was so big. But he ended up calling the cops. So he called the cops on me, and and you can hear this in the recording as well, but as he's like doing that, as he's calling the cops, I'm texting one of my law enforcement friends at the park, NPS law enforcement friends. I'm like texting her like, hey, like you gotta get here. Like, I don't really know what's going on. So his cop got there, and then my cop kind of got there a little bit after, and she was able to kind of diffuse the situation a little bit. But after that, I was scared for my life. It's like my coworkers are awesome. Management was awesome. And after that situation, my boss was pretty much like, hey, we can find you somewhere else to live. Like, I know you don't want to live there. They're trying. But again, I'm in the middle of Alabama in a remote location pretty much. And like, housing is hard like that. You're not going to find housing like that. So they tried really, 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 really hard to find me housing, and they just couldn't find me anywhere else to live. And I decided I was going to go back to Georgia and pursue a master's degree, and that's kind of the origin of my dissertation. So that situation, typically when I talk about my dissertation, I'll play the recording a little bit and explain that, hey, after that situation, I started asking a lot of questions that many other race researchers ask now, like, why aren't people of color in these places? Like, what's going on? Like, how do we sustain diversity in these places? And what are you doing when you're bringing in these diverse employees in these remote locations? Like, how are you supporting these employees? And granted, I had amazing supervisors, but still, I think I was their first Black employee. So it's like, what do you do in these isolated situations? So I just studied the experiences of Black employees in the National Park Service, and that's kind of the origin of my dissertation.
Wow, Akiebia, gosh, that is a heck of a story. Not surprisingly, an experience like that has never happened to me, and that is just, how does that impact you today? I would be, like you said, really scared, but like, it's awesome that you did pull out your phone and you had that moment of clarity within this like really horrible situation to record and to be also to text and support too. But how, you said that this obviously is something that was your origin story into this research. And it's a very powerful origin story, but in terms of, gaining research with it, but what about psychologically personal too? How does that type of experience impact you today, just on your daily functioning, going around different rural areas and stuff like that?
Yeah, so what's so strange about it is I grew up in a super rural area, probably a lot more rural than where I was in Alabama, a lot less diverse. Like one of my first times ever having a class with another person of color, I think I was like a sophomore in college.
Wow.
So this was like it. So it was so wild to me because it's like I'm kind of used to this stuff, but like even for me, being used to this stuff, which is a sad reality, but I am. So like even me like being used to this, like it was a lot because I'm completely loving my job. I like what I do for a living, and in that moment, I'm kind of forced out of something that I loved. And I do, like, I credit a lot of my interests today and progress today on that situation in that incident. And it's kind of shaped me as a better researcher. I am asking different questions than I would have asked before. So when we're looking at race research, a lot of race researchers are asking, why aren't people of color in natural spaces? But I've kind of reframed that. And now I'm kind of asking, why are people of color in these places? So I feel like if we can understand why the people who are currently there, maybe we can understand how to actually, sustain that diversity and reach out to other people of color. But yeah, it's definitely kind of shaped my lens as a researcher a little bit. I guess a little bit more, and it's so for my dissertation right now, I'm actually interviewing Black employees in the National Park Service. Okay. So I'm trying to figure out like how are the experiences differ across like genders, race, like even region. Like what are the common themes here? So I'm finding a lot of cool like common themes. So I've interviewed 15 Black employees in the National Park Service. And so I've done 2 per region. So there are 7 regions in the National Park Service, and then I did a regional office. So that makes the 15. So I've done 15 interviews so far, and it's so wild to see that most of the people that I'm interviewing have, I wouldn't say similar experiences, but I guess them being employed in the National Park Service, like it's a similar trajectory. Like I'm finding out that partnerships are so important to diversity, right? So out of my 15 employees, 14 out of 15 of those employees mentioned being introduced to the National Park Service through an internship. So whether that be Student Conservation Association or AmeriCorps or Youth Conservation Corps, American Conservation Experience. So all of those partnerships go hand in hand in diversity. So a lot of these people are saying the same things, like they never really visited national parks. They found a love for it through these internships. So and the only person that I interviewed that didn't enter in through an internship was actually just handpicked by former director John Jarvis. So that's literally the only person that I interviewed that didn't come in on an internship. So knowing how important partnerships are to diversity, and when we get into sustaining diversity, almost 11 out of the 15 people that I interviewed mentioned the importance of mentorship on job satisfaction and them wanting to stay in the agency. And I think sometimes when we think about mentorships, we kind of go into this frame where a mentorship is your supervisor or somebody supervising you, but a mentorship is a lot more than that. It's not just supervision. It's like that person helping you be your better self outside of that work environment too. So I think a lot of places fall short as far as like proper mentorships like that. That mentorship isn't just somebody that's supervising you every day and, telling you how to do your job, but how's this person helping you in your career? So those numbers they're very, very telling. And another common theme that has come up in those interviews would also be tokenism. So I asked my participants all the same question about tokenism, like basically give advice for managers on how to ensure their employees aren't feeling tokenized. So that's a big part of sustaining diversity and increasing job satisfaction. If you're feeling tokenized, then you're not gonna want to be there. You're not gonna be satisfied in that work environment because you're feeling like you're just another number. And I've gotten a lot of meaningful advice from participants on like what managers could do in those situations. And one of the pieces of advice that I was given, I also agreed with it. And one participant told me that managers have to do a better job at asking their Black employees input on other issues rather than diversity. So if my manager is coming to me for help on the Black History Month program, I'm not going to feel as tokenized as if that manager also asked for my input on President's Day or, something that doesn't have to do with DEI or diversity related issues. So, feeling like you're needed in other areas, you're not just serving on that diversity committee, but you're serving on other committees as well. So I think that's really important. And another piece of advice that one of my participants gave about feeling less tokenized in their work environment is when you're not the only person of color in the room, you're not going to feel tokenized. So if your manager is coming to you for help on that Black History Month project, but there are 5 other Black people in the room, but they came to you, you're not going to feel tokenized because they could have asked 5 other Black employees, their input on that. So, but they chose you. So you feel, less tokenized in that moment. And I know diversity in the National Park Service is a big issue, but job satisfaction in general is. So there's this survey that the OPM conducts every year. And out of 411 federal agencies, the National Park Service is ranked 353 on that list as far as best places to work. So it's we're trying to sustain diversity, but also other people in the agency aren't happy too. So what's going on? So a lot of my research studies that as well, and how job satisfaction may differ across groups.
Yeah. Gosh, Akiebia, that was a wonderful description of what you've been up to. I'm proud of you. That's just so cool. You've been having some really good findings. I love how you reframed your research to look at, maybe Black employees' motives for being there. I loved what you discovered about tokenism and the example you gave with President's Day. That was just really wonderful. And so do you know within that National Park Service, what types of structures and trainings are they starting to develop and put together so that they have more effective mentoring, more effective input from all employees for, more topics and whatnot. So what types of structures are being put into place there to help with a lot of that?
Right. So I know the National Park Service is doing a lot with, and even starting under John Jarvis, he did a wonderful job at the diversity trainings and the partnerships and all of that. But it's, so currently I am unsure of the progress with that. But I do know that it's my hope with my dissertation, I hope to just be able to present it to the National Park Service, hey, this is pretty much what you all are should be doing to sustain diversity. Because I feel our big thing is always, we have to increase diversity, increase. But I feel sustaining is so much more important. So it's because you're just going to end up in a cycle if you're not sustaining. You're gonna recruit those diverse employees. They're gonna be dissatisfied in the workplace. They're gonna leave. You're gonna recruit more. So what are we doing to kind of keep those people there, and also keeping those people there? That's going to help out with I guess the knowledge, like having that older knowledge still in the National Park Service rather than recruit. We should be sustaining. So I feel like we need to focus a lot more on that. Like, what should we be doing to support our current employees? Like, if you can't support your current employees, diverse employees, then why are you bringing more in?
Yeah.
Like for the same thing to happen like that. It just doesn't make a lot of sense.
No, and that job satisfaction is so important on so many levels. I mean, the examples that you gave, I was also just thinking about all that attrition. It's got to be expensive because then you got to retrain people and bring them in and get them, settled and whatnot. That's a timely process. But I really love that, again, you reframed it to sustain. And I think that's, something that's really, really important for keeping people around, and also really important for people not feeling tokenized too. So that's a really cool outcome as well. So with your research, you said you've reached out to 15 National Park Service employees, and I'm assuming you probably are doing really in-depth qualitative research with them. And so what does that research process look like?
Yeah, so that is one article, right? So I'm doing, I've interviewed for 15 Black employees, but I also have an article where I'm interviewing 15 managers, which I've already done that as well. So kind of getting their input on like decision making and what they're doing. So with the management piece, like we're getting into housing and other challenges that managers may face as far as recruiting diverse candidates and sustaining that diversity. And so for that process, I've already finished my interviews. I've already coded, have all my things and whatnot. And the first article of my dissertation is actually a quantitative article where I did surveying at the Smokies, which is obviously we all know it's the most visited national park, but they also have a Black superintendent. So I was like, gotta survey at the Smokies. So I'm trying to figure out how the job satisfaction at the Smokies differ from the National Park Service as a whole. And like so far, like what I'm finding is like people at the Smokies are happy. So like I am studying job satisfaction across like positions, pay, sexuality, race, gender, so many different domains of like job satisfaction. I'm looking at that, and people there are happy. So it kind of makes me wonder, like, is this like it is obviously not. Maybe this is like an isolated case where people at the Smokies are happy, or like what's going on there. From those interviews, it looks like most of the people that I've served, or from those surveys, it's like most of the people I surveyed or get the option to work from home. Is that a reason why, people are satisfied there? Most of a few of the interviews that I have were actually Black employees at the Smokies, and they're talking about like the autonomy they have and like feedback, which is very important for job satisfaction. Like, is my manager giving me feedback? That's one of the 5 domains of job satisfaction. And do I have autonomy? Do I identify with the task that I'm performing and not just feeling like I'm doing tasks for busy work? Another domain of job satisfaction. So people there are pretty happy, and I'm kind of getting the idea that I'm not sure if it's like a regional thing, like is it like a southeast region thing? Are they happy because it's like regional, or is it like just management in general? But I was really surprised by those surveys, and I was honestly thinking I was going to get different results, like seeing those federal numbers and seeing that as a whole, like people in the National Park Service are happy, but they're happy here. So should we be doing more of whatever the Smokies, whatever they're doing at the Smokies? Should we be doing that as a whole? And it's been really cool to be able to talk to managers and the challenges that managers have, because a lot of challenges are so external, and so many challenges they literally have no say over. I was talking to a manager that told me that as far as like housing goes, like she's like, we want to increase diversity so bad, but as far as like housing in my town, she was like, if we were to tell, like if a landlord, some of the landlords here were to know that we were housing a Black employee, they would not be for that. They would not allow that to happen. So you get these parks that are really trying to increase diversity and sustain that, but they're being met by other roadblocks as that one is, something you can't really do anything about that. So, and we know that there is a big housing crisis in a National Park Service. So like I know some managers have started partnering with apartment complexes. Like, hey, give us a discount. We have 15 seasonals this summer. Give us a discount to, to house these seasonals. I know there are some parks that are partnering with dorms in the summertime. Like there aren't students there. Can we house our seasonals there? But when you get in these places where, people of color aren't even welcome, like, what do you do? Like, do you bring them in that situation? Or do you, keep the numbers looking like they currently do, which is like, it's a lose-lose situation for all parties. So it's really tough. And I really enjoyed being able to kind of understand managers and how they're forced with these challenges, especially decision-making and bringing in more people.
Yeah, those external factors are so challenging. And so does the National Park Service work with communities outside of their boundaries, maybe but localized near the boundary, to provide more education, or are they doing anything to try to help with those situations that are just external and horrible, and it contributes to this lose-lose situation that you just said?
Yeah, so I feel like it's more of an individual park basis. Like I feel like there are so many parks that, kind of do have the answers. They are utilizing those friend groups and those partnerships. Like they're truly doing that. But then you have other parks that, not so much. It's one of those things where the Park Service is, federal government and, when leadership changes, like things are going to change. And that's the thing, like things are probably changing every 4 years in the agency. Like, you get some progress and then, you're taking a few steps back and so on. So that makes it a little tough too, I would imagine. Also just, changing in superintendents. I feel like there are superintendents that are, at certain places for forever. They have that knowledge and they leave. And so you're bringing in somebody else that doesn't really know what's going on. So, if I had any advice for the National Park Service, it would definitely be managerial training, like making sure, and they do training, but maybe a little bit more extensive, where people are able to, or places are able to, like, really retain that knowledge over time. Like what happens when a leader that's been there forever leaves? Like what, is the story still going to be interpreted the same? Like, what's going on here?
Yeah, that institutional knowledge is so important. You pointed that out earlier, just with employee attrition. You're losing that knowledge and you're bringing in new knowledge. And, if there's an employee attrition, whether it's at the managerial level or seasonal level, there's an accumulation of institutional knowledge that's so important to maintain. When you were doing your work over at Great Smoky Mountains National Park and interviewing managers, I'm assuming the superintendent was probably way too busy, but were you able to interact with the superintendent at all and interview him?
So he's been extremely helpful. Like we've had a lot of, he's come up to Clemson for like Hartzog and all of that.
Nice.
And we've had so many good conversations, and he let me know up front. He was like, I support what you're doing. Like, I love this. Like, I want to have conversations about, we've talked about it and whatnot. And he's, just pointed me to the right direction of people to interview. So I haven't interviewed him yet, but I have had a lot of meaningful conversations with them. Like, I've seen a lot of his presentations on the Smokies. So he's been a lot of help. But nice. I have interviewed a few managers at the Smokies who were Black managers.
Cool. Yeah, that's really important research. And I love that getting the managerial perspective is, I feel like, just always really important. Let's transition into hearing about kind of some of the cultivation of Black philanthropy within the National Park Service. And I was kind of, just before we jumped onto the podcast, I was doing a little bit of research on your background and and the research that you conduct. And I saw that, I think kind of recently you did an article with a research team in which you kind of looked at how to cultivate Black philanthropy at the National Park Service. I think one of the findings was that, a lot of people actually were not even aware or even thought of that as an option. Do you want to kind of discuss that research?
Yeah, so I feel like this mirrors almost everything else when we think about not even just like giving back, but those diverse voices and diverse input in natural spaces. It's like that awareness. It's that lack of awareness. Like, how are we making people aware that this is a thing? Like, even like I didn't even know it was a thing. So like, what are we doing as far as outreach? So that's a really big deal as far as increasing those diverse people that give back, because it's not they don't have it, so they're not giving. It's like they have no idea that this is an option. And another one of the issues that we have too is like, you feel more inclined to give back in places where you can kind of see yourself. So if I don't really see my story or see myself in this space, then will I give back? So that's more of like, what are we doing to make sure people are aware of those counter narratives of the National Park Service story rather than the master narrative? Like, if people knew that, hey, we've played a big part in the creation of the National Park Service. Like, this is just as much as, our parks as anybody else. Like, we helped build these parks. Like, the earliest park guardians were Buffalo soldiers that, they patrolled Yosemite. So, and a lot of people don't know this, and like, these stories are missing from the master narrative. And like, how do we, and I feel like by kind of more, I guess, better interpretation, like, what are we doing as far as interpreting that history, and letting people kind of see their place, like the place that, in indigenous peoples as well, like, they Mexican Americans, like the help that they've assisted, I guess, the National Park Service in general with the creation, like, before it was approved by Congress and like it was ran by the military. Like, these are the people, people of color were the ones that were preventing poaching and just patrolling those natural areas. So what went wrong? Like, why do most people think that we're kind of missing from that narrative that we very much so played a big part in? So I feel like if we're doing a better job at interpretation and letting people know that, hey, this is our place too. And I guess we could tap into place attachment, like, making sure that people are attached to that place, then you're more inclined to want to give back. So I feel like that's more of like an internal issue with the National Park Service, and something that they are working on, making sure that history is told. And, we have the Charles Young Buffalo Soldiers site, and that tells that story very well. So the National Park Service is trying to do better about interpretation. So I feel like it's more of an over time type thing. Like, maybe over time, like, we'll see ourselves in these spaces a little bit more. And, groups like Outdoor Afro are kind of helping with that as well. Like, they're Latinos Outdoors, like, they're helping people of color kind of see their places in these natural spaces, which is very important to me, wanting to give back, right? So you just have to feel like you're part of that broader community, and that there's some benefit for you to want to give back, and that goes for anything.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad you brought up Outdoor Afro. I live in rural Kansas, and I never get to go to, well, I rarely get to go to an REI. And I was out for Thanksgiving visiting my parents in the Phoenix area, and we decided to go to an REI out there. And I was thrilled to see that Outdoor Afro has a little bit of a clothing line in REI, and I thought that was just super cool to see. Also, last week I did a recording with Dr. Bess Perry, who I think you're familiar with, and we were just talking about parks and protected areas relevance. And one of the things that she really focuses on is multifaceted connections. So if people, feel connected to an area, maybe physically, cognitively, socially, they're going to be more inclined to be stewards of that area. And that, I think, is, a direct connection to what you were describing. And that master narrative, it's great to hear that National Park Service recognizes that BIPOC communities are missing from that master narrative. And they've, really done a great job of trying to change that and fix that up and whatnot. So it's great to hear that National Park Service recognize that they're making changes and whatnot. So that's really wonderful. So Akiebia, you are finishing up your dissertation at Clemson University. And so when is the PhD graduation?
Oh man, this is a hard one.
Hopefully, so I guess hopeful graduation date.
One day, maybe. So I'm really, really, really like crossing my fingers to defend in March and possibly graduate in May. We will see though. But I'm really pushing for that spring graduation. Okay.
Yeah. And I know how that goes. You're in a pressurized period of PhD land right now. Well, hopefully you can get some rest over the holidays here. And then, get into the thick of that. I know it's extremely time consuming, especially with doing the nature of your research, with doing those in-depth qualitative interviews. That's super time consuming analysis. At Clemson, what researchers are you working with there?
All right. So I'm working with Dr. Seen Harper. So that is my chair, my advisor. She's been amazing. I couldn't ask for a better advisor. Dr. Brownlee, he's co-advising, amazing. Also working with Dr. Lori Dickus. She's also amazing. And Dr. Lauren Duffy. So I have all the big timers on my committee.
What a great committee! What a great committee! I'm really happy to hear that Abby is leading the way for you. She has just a wonderful story to tell, and I'm hoping to get her onto All Bodies Outside, just because she brings another great, unique perspective towards race research. And I really loved how you started off your description earlier on about your origin story, how you lived within, was it 10 minutes, 15 minutes of 2 national parks and didn't even know about it. And it's like, okay, I had accessibility. There was no fees there. And so, as you mentioned earlier, your perspective and bringing in your perspective in that line of research and the story that you're telling through your research, it's so powerful. And I'm just so happy with what you're doing. I think it's fantastic. And want to, say thank you for coming on to Old Bodies Outside and describing what you've been finding with your research. Also, your experiences, that horrific experience I couldn't even imagine. I'm glad that it was at least modern times that you had the cell phone with you to be able to record and to also text and get support with that situation. And it was also great, the support that you did get after that situation had diffused. You're able to get in the park. People really cared a lot about you. And that was really wonderful to hear about. So, Akiebia, thank you so much for coming on to Old Bodies Outside. I really appreciate it. And for those of you listening out there, I did also want to give a final shout out to the George Wright Society, who is sponsoring this episode. And as I mentioned at the start of the show, when you have time, check out George Wright Society's website, and that is georgewrightsociety.org. And Wright is spelled W-R-I-G-H-T. So, Akiebia, I'm going to throw on the outro music, and we'll call it an episode. And thank you so much for coming on to All Bodies Outside.